and to understand and learn lessons from them. Our first talk, Lessons of Srebrenica, Acknowledgement, Justice and Peace Building, deals with one of the most harrowing tales of genocide in modern history. The massacre, which happened just over a quarter of a century ago, resulted in the deaths of 8,372 victims, mostly men and boys, over the space of a few days in July 1995. All bar one of the victims were Muslim. I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to Nejad Avdik, who will share his experience of the genocide with us this morning, and Peter Osborne, Chair of Remembering Srebrenica, Northern Ireland, who will facilitate this morning's question and answer session. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Nejad's story is both harrowing and challenging, and many of us will be familiar with the language and tone leading up to the atrocity, as much of the same rhetoric was used here in Northern Ireland. The most important thing about the past is to learn from it, and as a consequence to try not to repeat the mistakes. This series of talks will, I am sure, give us plenty to ponder, and I am sure we will be able to draw parallels with our own situation. Once again, thank you for joining today's event. Thank you one and all.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that warm welcome. Very much appreciated. I'd now like to hand you over to Peter Osborne, who the Chair's already highlighted there. Peter is the Chair of Remembering Srebrenica in Northern Ireland, and he's going to be facilitating this morning's event for us. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Pauline, and thanks, Chair Errol, for the introduction. Can I say also thanks to the Good Relations Department of Fermanagh and Omagh District Council for putting this event on. It's one of a series of events they and many others are doing for Good Relations Week 2021. And on that note, also thanking everybody for joining us, but in particular thanks to representatives from the Executive Office, given the fact that they're also fund a lot of the activities during Good Relations Week and are very supportive of it. And also, I noticed the ambassador, the Bosnia-Herzegovina ambassador for the UK and Ireland has joined us, and you're very welcome, Vanja, as well. Thank you for doing that. A particular thanks to Nejad. I will introduce Nejad a little bit more formally in a few minutes' time, but Nejad's story is on the chat function if you do want to look at it meantime, or you can print it off and look at it later. But it's an incredibly powerful and moving story that we have lessons to learn from here in Northern Ireland. And that's partly what has involved me personally in remembering Srebrenica, not just to commemorate the victims of one of the worst atrocities, genocides that happened in Europe within our lifetimes, but also because when you examine what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina, examine the Balkans as a whole, an area with competing ethnic, religious, and geographical identities, you see so many issues. Region has come out of violence from the 1990s. You see so many issues that are very familiar to us here in Northern Ireland. We have many lessons to learn from each other. Many of those issues are unresolved, and we'll touch a little bit on some of those legacy issues after the violence in Bosnia. And again, we will be able to see some similarities to where we are here in Northern Ireland and Ireland as we struggle to deal with many of those issues too. Before I introduce Nejad, though, I want to go through some slides, and it's only going to take me about 10 minutes. But I suspect many people who are here hearing about Srebrenica for the first time have some basic questions about what happened, where is it, how does it relate to us? And I want to go through some slides which maybe explain some of that background information, which Nejad, if I get it wrong, Nejad, you can correct me when you come to speak yourself in about 5 or 10 minutes time. So let me go through these slides if I can get this technology working and fill in some background. Two things before I do though. Once Nejad, or after Nejad speaks and tells his story, we do want interaction with those who are here. So please, if you do have questions, either put your hand up or let us know and we'll come to you directly, or else ask the question in the chat function and we will relay that question to Nejat or open it to the floor, depending on what is relevant to the question. But please do ask questions. It's really important that we have interaction. And the second point is, as Pauline would want me to say, she will be sending out some evaluation sheets to everybody. Please do fill them in and return them after the event to let the council know whether this is the sort of thing you want to hear more about, not Srebrenica, but this sort of discussion on some key issues. Okay, we'll touch on a number of other things as we go through the session. Let's talk a little bit about, well, what happened. The picture you see in front of you is the former United Nations base at Srebrenica, Srebrenica Potocari, which are some villages in the middle of Bosnia where the Srebrenica genocide happened in July 1995. Actually, many of the victims were pushed out of what they considered a safe zone in the United Nations area, pushed out of the United Nations base, and were then separated, and the men and boys taken away to be killed, and the women and the girls were taken out of the area. That base has become the central point for the Srebrenica Memorial, where the victims are buried, and there are more victims being found every year and continue to be buried. Because the victims were dug up and reburied, and dug up and reburied again by the Serb forces, some of those victims are buried in parts because some of their remains still have yet to be found. You see some of the headstones of the victims there, all but one of them were Muslim. So one of the basic questions, where is Bosnia-Herzegovina? And there you see it in red. As you can see, Bosnia-Herzegovina is in the heart of Europe. And when, without making any political statement, or there's no politics in this at all, but when the genocide started in July 1995, at exactly the same point here in Northern Ireland, we were in the middle of one of the first Gavaki Road protests. Those of us of an age will remember when Ian Paisley and David Trimble joined hands at the bottom of the Gavaki Road. At that point, the genocide was starting at Srebrenica. And you'll see from this, when people were leaving Northern Ireland or Ireland on their holidays in July, because that's when a lot of people went on holiday, they would very often be flying over Bosnia to get to Turkey or to Greece, or maybe to go to Bulgaria, or even close by in Italy. And while they were enjoying their holidays, not that many miles away, people were being killed because of their religion. But you can see also that Bosnia is a beautiful country. Top left is the Mos Star Bridge. When the war started in 1992, it was largely between Croat and Serb forces, and the Croat forces blew up the Mos Star Bridge, hundreds of years old, has now been rebuilt. Sarajevo itself, in the bottom left-hand side, old town of Sarajevo, was wonderful to walk around, a hint. Before it gets too touristy, it's a lovely place to go for a city break. You see in the bottom right-hand side, Sarajevo itself, and the countryside is just stunning with mountains and trees and all sorts of other things to attract you, and some wonderful, friendly people as well. We remember this region, many of us, as the old Yugoslavia. And I can remember Tito, who was the head of that old Yugoslavia. This is what he said about his country. I'm the leader of one country with 2 alphabets, 3 languages, 4 religions, 5 nationalities, 6 republics, surrounded by 7 neighbors, a country in which live 8 ethnic minorities. And that's partly why, even as somebody from here in Northern Ireland and Ireland, where we have our own share of religious and ethnic or identity issues, we often find it very confusing when we look at what happened in the old Yugoslavia and in the Balkans. Although it's not that confusing. Certainly it's not confusing when thousands of people are killed in cold blood in a week. The morality of that isn't confusing at all. This is how the old Yugoslavia sort of looked before the war, reflecting Tito's statement. And we're going to be dealing with the country that is Bosnia-Herzegovina, Sarajevo, the capital. Potocari and Srebrenica, which Nejat is going to be talking about, is roughly in the northeast of the country, in a region that is now called Republic of Republic of Srpska, which is in Bosnia itself, which is split into two separate regions, which I'll talk about. As Yugoslavia broke up, Serbia dominated the old Yugoslavia, dominated the old Yugoslav army, and tried to retain the identity of the old Yugoslavia. But Slovenia was the first to go as it broke up. Croatia then followed, and Bosnia and some of the other regions followed after that. And in 1992, Yugoslavia split and descended into civil war. That picture is complicated by the number of different ethnic groups in Bosnia, which was the center of that war between 1992 and 1995. So you have Serbia trying to retain the old Yugoslavia, then giving up on retaining it when it was clear that it wasn't going to stay together. And the Serb view then was, let's see if we can get the Serb populations, the Bosnian Serb populations, into a greater Serbia, while Croatia had their eyes on the Croat population of Bosnia. Bosnia itself was an incredibly diverse country and still is, and there was those three competing or different identities: the Bosniaks, or the Bosnian Muslims, the Bosnian Croats, and the Bosnian Serbs, each with their different religious outlook as well. And that patchwork quilt of different identities within Bosnia made it an incredibly complex picture for the conflict itself. Sarajevo was besieged for 3 years during the war. We will remember news items about Sniper Alley, and we will remember the bombs that were being thrown down on Sarajevo by a Serb army that didn't get into the city, didn't probably want to get into the city, but shelled it from the hills around. And there were many atrocities, including some of the markets that were hit, and a lot of children who died during the conflict as well. Sarajevo under siege for 3 years. The United Nations, though based in the airport at the city, and actually a tunnel was built under the airport to supply the local diverse Bosniak, Bosnian Croat, and Bosnian Serb population of the city, surrounded by Serb forces. Within a year of the start of the war, this is how Bosnia looked. And it's really how it looks today, because in 1995, when the Dayton Peace Agreement was signed, wherever the paramilitary forces were at the time is where the land was retained. So the Serb paramilitary forces, backed by Serbia, but the Bosnian Serb paramilitary forces had taken over this area of land in Bosnia. That's still in Bosnia, but it's now called the Republic of Srpska as a region of Bosnia. And this area in the center is a very diverse federation area, highly power shared and highly devolved government, but all part of the one country of Bosnia. Srebrenica is up around here in the Republic of Srpska. And that's how Bosnia looks with the Republic of Srpska and the Federation, highly devolved, highly power sharing. The war had a pretty devastating effect on the country, and the country is still dealing with the effect of that 20 odd years after the Dayton Peace Agreement. And Dayton Peace Agreement, I think they're one of the questions that we all should be asking ourselves, but particularly in Bosnia, whether it ended the violence, but it's failed adequately to build the peace. Bosnia, in the latest census in 2013, 50% Bosniak, Bosnian Muslim, 31% Bosnian Serb, 15% Bosnian Croat. And now you have a situation where most of the Bosnian Serbs live in the Republic of Srpska, and most of the Bosnian Croats and Bosniaks live in the Federation. 2 million people were displaced. About half of them have returned to their homes, but the statistics show that the 40% of Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims who returned to Republic of Srpska, including Nejad, are 10 times more likely to be the victim of violent crime, given their minority status and given the continuing issues between the different ethnic backgrounds in Bosnia as a whole. Those two regions, both within Bosnia, 1.2 million people in the Republic of Srpska, largely Serb. As you can see, a greater proportion of the country than the population because of the way the paramilitary forces ended up at the end of the conflict. And even issues like, and I've just highlighted this, issues like what flags are flown are really important. The Bosnian flag is flown in public buildings in the Republic of Srpska, is rarely seen in other places, whereas in the Federation, it's frequently used because the Federation is more comfortable with the Bosnian identity. What we want to focus on, though, is what happened in July 1995 towards the end of that war. When, and I remember the news reports at the time on the BBC saying we're getting some worrying indications of something happening in the north of the country, but we're not sure what it is. And as the news filtered through over a period of days or weeks, it became clear that something pretty awful had happened around that village of Srebrenica and Podachari. That was a region declared a UN safe zone. The Dutch peacekeepers who were there were effectively bullied by the Serb forces who invaded Srebrenica in genocide. And as I say, hundreds, if not thousands of people pushed out of the UN center that were then separated into men and boys and women and girls. The genocide that happened is as defined as an intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic or racial or religious group from an area or from a country, in this case, the area around Srebrenica. In July 1995, nearly 8,500 Bosnian Muslim men and boys who had sought refuge in the UN safe area were murdered by and killed by the Serb forces. Now we're going to hear from Nejad, who was one of the victims, who survived that genocide, and we'll hear what happened to him. And Nejad, again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story, which is incredibly powerful, but I'm sure very difficult for you to do, but very important that you do as well. I'm not going to speak an awful lot about that because I think that's for Nejad to talk about what happened at Srebrenica. I just want to put this up before we go on to Nejad. If you do want to hear more about it, there's a website to visit. Please do follow Remembering Srebrenica on Twitter or Facebook. And please do come to events or ask us further questions in the chat function now or afterwards as well. But we're incredibly fortunate to hear from Nejad Avdic, who is a survivor of that genocide in 1995. In 10 minutes or so, I can't do justice to 3 years of war and conflict that took about 100,000 lives and displaced so many people and had such an impact on a country and the people who live in that country. That's maybe for another session. But what we do want to do is focus as part of that conflict on those days in July 1995 at Srebrenica. Nejad was 17 years old in 1995. He and his family took refuge in the UN safe zone, promised safety and protection by the United Nations forces. But that just didn't happen, as the United Nations forces allowed the Bosnian Serb paramilitary forces to take over that area, and then so many people were eventually killed. Nejad survived and went back to Podachari and lives in Podachari and Srebrenica still. But it is very important that he and others tell their story to the rest of the world. For those of us, many of us in Northern Ireland and Ireland who have never spoken to a survivor and maybe don't know an awful lot of the details of what happened at Srebrenica. Nejad, thank you so much again for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will hear directly from you now. I'm looking for you on the screen. I can't, oh, there you are, I've got you now. Nejad, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if I've done justice to the history and the background to the conflict in Bosnia, but hopefully it gives everybody a bit of a flavor to it. But more importantly, we want to hear your story. So July 1995 and the Srebrenica genocide. Thanks for joining us. Let me hand over to you to tell us your story and what happened to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you once more for invitation to join the webinar, and thank you for your sharing the slides and some facts about Bosnia, and it is so fundamental for the people know something about that before I started to say something about my experience in that days of July 1995. But before I returned to that July and specific 11th of July, I will say something shortly about my childhood and my earlier years and the years from the beginning of the war. Just short, I will say something about just short. Yeah. Yeah, as you know, as you could see, the war in Bosnia started 1992 at the spring, and for us, for my family, which lived in the eastern of Bosnia, that region was mainly populated by Bosniaks by Muslim population, and we were a dominant group here in eastern Bosnia. And this area of Bosnia was not so developed, was not so rich like Sarajevo, like capital city or Sarajevo and other cities on western parts on Bosnia, but this region was full of life and perspective, and we didn't have at the time before the war any ethnical excesses, conflicts, serious situation was peaceful, and we had a normal state, normal life, normal educational system, everything what was positive, and I just can say all the best in my childhood and about that period. I can say anything negative, and I'm talking now about from the perspective of one boy. And I remember from that period conflict in the Northern Ireland as a boy, but I didn't understand that, because we had a prosperous state, normal life, and I have to admit we didn't understand that we didn't interested in that. But in a few years later, genocide affected us, and we survived the most horrible horror here. And yeah, but as my family was an average family. My parents lived in a small village not far from Srebrenica, around 20 kilometers, neighboring municipality of Vlasenica. We lived on a village. We have a small farm. My father worked for one company as well from Serbia. My mother and me, every day we worked on the field. We visited schools, and it was our life. But my parents were not politically active, and they didn't have. They thought that they didn't have anything with the coming conflicts, which was in Croatia, in Slovenia, and we said that if war would come, it can last for not for so long, and we can live in our home. We don't have with anything that, you know. But other people who had different plans in their heads, they didn't thought in that way. And soon after that, when war started, my village was totally destroyed to the ground. But we were lucky to escape. To escape and to hide in the forests, but the Serb soldiers, Serb army, and the police forces, paramilitary forces took village by village, town by town, and in the end we had only Srebrenica where we could go. Other towns, other villages were totally destroyed, or complete population was deported or was killed. And in the spring of 1993, I arrived in Srebrenica with my family, with my father and with my 3 younger sisters. as the Srebrenica at the time declared a safe zone, and because of that, it was a result that it was a highly populated. In normal state, Srebrenica had around 5,000 inhabitants, but at the time, over 40,000 people arrived there to find a shelter. And yeah, Srebrenica was under protection by UN, declared a safe zone, and it was hope for us. And I remember from that period when I arrived at the town that we were without anything, without food, without electricity, without running water, without medicine, without anything. Really, we lived on the streets, in the garage, in the schools, everywhere. So many refugees were around us, around fire, around streets. And in the end, Swedish government helped building of one refugee camp near Srebrenica. It was around 15 kilometers far from Srebrenica, and I was sent, my family, in fact, with other refugees, was sent there to live there, and we lived there until July 1995. And I started with my school as well. I was the first grade of high school in the spring of 1995. In fact, I spent around 2 years in Srebrenica. It was Srebrenica under siege, but at the time it was a relatively peaceful period. But so forces were around Srebrenica, and we couldn't leave that zone, and we just were suffering there without food, without anything. Of course, we had some supply of food from the UN. From the UN and from Sky, from American airplanes, gave us something of food at the time, and it was a really difficult period. But we hope that the Blue Helmets came there to help us, to protect us, and we. I thought that the war can last maybe for 2 years, 3 years, but cannot last for forever. And we in that Blue Helmets, we saw the light at the end of tunnel, but we were wrong. In fact, they just came there to observe our tragedy, and in fact, in the end, they helped Serb forces to occupy Srebrenica and to commit the genocide. They just observe our tragedy, and because of that, I'm very I was very angry, because they gave us hope, but it was false hope. We took them for friends who came to help us, but unfortunately they didn't. And when the return now on July, on 11th of July, when that they came, Serb offensives started a few days before, on 6th of July, and as Srebrenica was our last shelter, last refuge, we didn't know where to go again, because in previous months and years we were hiding in the forests, and in the end we arrived in Srebrenica, but now we didn't know where to go. And in next days we were hiding in the forests, and in one moment on the 11th of July, my mother and 3 younger sisters with other refugees decided to go to Potocari, to the UN base, that they wanted to find shelter there. And my other relatives as well decided to go there. Some of them were male, and it was a question for me where to go, because my father decided to join the column of men and boys who decided to reach the Tuzla territory, the territory under Bosnian government control. It was a perilous way on the west, around 100 kilometers through minefields, through mountains, through hills, and it was very difficult for me to make decision, but my father said to me at that moment, I remember his words, because at the time I was 17-year old, he said to me, it is up to you, you have your life in your hands, it's up to you to decide what to do, to join your mother and sister or to join the column with me. And I said, I will join the column, and today I survived. Probably if I decided different, I wouldn't. Soon after the column started, that way through the minefields, through the woods, that column was cut, and because of constant bombardment and shelling by Serb artillery, a lot of people were killed there, were wounded, and I remember at the beginning of the column, I lost my father. I lost my father there, and I just remember that I was calling for him. In fact, I found myself in the mass of 10,000 and 15,000 of men and boys. And I didn't know at that moment anyone. I just was calling for my father to find him, but it was in vain. And in the end, I joined the column. I was at the rear part of the column between 1,000 and 2,000 men and boy when it was cut. And soon after that, in fact, after 2 days and nights, the Serb police and the Serb officers started to call us to surrender, to get out from the forest, to get out on the road. But we had fear for our lives. We didn't dare to get out because they could kill us. But after that, they promised that we wouldn't be killed. They promised our lives, and I remember their words. They said that we would be treated according to all the Geneva Conventions. I remember that words very, very, very well. And on the 13th of July, we were on the road carrying on our wounded people, our wounded friends. Many of them were my school friends, and later I saw many of them were my neighbors. And in one moment, we were on the road where were a lot of Serb tanks and other vehicles on wheels, and a lot of Serb soldiers. And soon after that, we were loaded on the trucks, and we spent one day in Bratunac town on the trucks, and the column of trucks and buses, together with the separated men and boys from Potocari, from the base, they were together with us in the same column, and the column of the trucks and buses took their way somewhere. But at that moment, we didn't know where we were going, I just remember that the situation and conditions on the truck was horrific, and it was a catastrophe for us, because the Serb soldiers closed the canvas on the tracks completely, and we couldn't take fresh air, if I can say that the air fresh was in July at the time, because outside the truck was a temperature over 31 degrees of Celsius. On the truck, you can imagine how it was that the people, prisoner, drank their own urine. And I just remember that was one small hole on the canvas, and through that hole I could take fresh air from time to time, and I could follow the direction of the moving of the trucks. And in one moment, the trucks stopped in front of the one building, and it was one building. Later, I will see that it was one school near town of Zvornik, around 70 kilometers far from Srebrenica, and all the mass executions took place around town of Zvornik. And there a reason why the Serb forces did so. and they had planned to kill people far from Srebrenica to hide the crimes. And when I remember one moment on the track during driving, I could see through the whole the people, Serb population in town of Zvornik, the town where I was born. They were swimming in the Drina River, and some of them just looking at us, and the other were calling for us and offending us. And some of them were very cruel toward us, toward prisoners. And I remember that people talk about that on prisoners. In fact, talked about that, about destiny, and where we could end. And it was some people thought that we will be sent to our authorities, Bosnian authorities, or we will be changed, or we will be sent to our families as the Serb forces promised. And it was logical to think in that way. We think if they wanted to kill us, they could do it immediately without driving us and in so many directions. But they had a plan, and the same day, on the 14th of July, as soon as night fell, they started with mass killing. And I remember that I was imprisoned in one classroom in the school. It was the first floor of that school. That school was in a village of Petkovci near a town of Zvornik, and all the time I could hear gunfire outside. I could hear orders. I could hear screaming. I could hear beating outside in the hall of the school, and it was a constant gunfire. And somewhere around midnight, it was my time to get out. And I remember in one moment that Serb soldiers opened the fire from outside, and all the windows were broken, and the people were wounded around me. They were crying, they were calling for help, but no one could help them. And I remember one of my neighbor who was hit in his neck. And later I found my uncle in the same classroom. He was amongst prisoners. He was in one angle of the classroom, and I asked him to get out together outside, because one of Serb soldiers came and said that we should have prepared, because Red Cross could arrive to register us for exchange. But it was lie. It was just the calm situation, because prisoners could jump out, and because of that, they wanted to make situation relaxed, and people in one moment started to think that the Red Cross could arrive to register us, and that we could be saved. But 1 hour later, it was my turn to get out, and I asked my uncle to get out together with him. He refused. He didn't want to get out with me. And when I was in the hall, there was no Red Cross. There was no anything like that. It was just a lie of Serb soldiers, and they waiting for me. And one of them ordered me to get off my shoes, to get off my clothes to the waist, and other soldiers tied my hands in my back and pushed me to the next classroom. In the next classroom were a lot of clothes, were a lot of belongings from the people who had already left the school and who already killed. And when they finished with that, we were in the column leaving the school. But leaving the school, I could see blood on the floor, on the on the hall, and I just remember that I was going in this way with my head bent down, waiting to be killed immediately there, but they didn't kill me. They didn't kill us in the school or in front of the school, but leaving the school on the left and the right side of the main door, I could see piles and piles of dead bodies. They didn't kill us there. They put us they load us on the truck, and in 5 or 10 minutes, the truck arrived on the location where they executed the people, and it was a place of mass executions. In fact, it was one dam near town of Osborne, and I just remember that moments with very clearly, and that moments cannot be forgotten anywhere, because together with me amongst prisoners were my teachers from Srebrenica, were my neighbors, were some of my relatives and friends. And I remember that my teacher was behind me, and when we arrived on the location outside, we could hear gunfire, automatic gunfire, and in one moment Serb soldiers ordered us to get out in the groups of 5. All the time I was hiding behind others, and all others did the same. Probably it is very difficult to explain that, but probably I wanted to leave a few more seconds. And in one moment, one of the prisoners succeeded to untie himself, and he asked me, "Do you want to untie you?" And I refused. I said, no, anyway, I would be killed. And he tried to escape. He jumped out and tried to escape, but he was killed on the spot. And when there was no more space for me for hiding, I jumped out, and they said to me, they sent to us, in fact, to find a place. At that moment, I didn't know what they were talking about, but because I just was walking in this way with my bend down, I realized it was the end. And at that moment, I was so thirsty, because I was without water for days, and I just wanted a drop of water at that moment. And it was happening so fast. It was a matter of seconds. And I just remember when I reached the area, I noticed the rows and rows of dead bodies in front of me. And at that moment, I just thought that at that moment I just think that my mother would never know. Will never know where I ended up. And at that moment, I didn't think about myself. I think about my mother, and that they will suffer for me. And at that moment, I was shocked that I don't remember when I was hit. They started to fire, and I don't remember how it was happened, but I just remember I was lying, I was shivering, I was trembling, and already I was hit with 3 bullets in my right side of my stomach, and one bullet hit my right arm. And on my right side, I could see people were falling down. And later, when they put next line behind me, one bullet hit my left foot. It was very, very painful for me at that moment. I just pray God to die, because it it was impossible for me to live anymore. It was a real suffering for me, and I all the time I could hear bullets were whizzing and were hitting around me everywhere, and I just waited for next one to hit me and to finish with me. But later, when they finished with that, killing, a lot of people were wounded everywhere around, and a lot of voices, people were moaning, were crying, and in one moment, one of the Serb soldiers gave orders to the other and mentioned a name of one Serb soldiers by name Jovo. He's saying to him, Jovo, you should check all the bodies and give everybody a new bullet if they have warm body. But he refused, offending victims, offending us. And in one moment, I just noticed a military step in front of my eyes, and I waiting to kill me. But he killed a guy beside me who was moaning so loudly, and the parts of ammunition hit my back part of my head and my shoulder. And I said to myself, oh my mom, why don't I die? Why don't I die? I'm wounded all over my body, and it was horrible. It was so unbearable for me, and I could hear less and less voices. And in one moment, Serb soldiers left the place, started truck and left the place, and I wanted to call him to kill me, but I didn't dare to call him, and I was lying there waiting to die, because I could never imagine that I could survive. It was not possible, really. And in one moment, I'm trying to turn my head on my left side to make it more comfortable to die easier. In fact, I was bleeding at that moment, and at that moment, when I rose my head, I noticed someone was moving in front of me. In fact, it was other survivor, and I'm asking him, "Are you alive? Are you alive?" He said, "Yes, come to untie me. Come to untie me." But I didn't. I said, I'm wounded. I cannot move. But he insisted. He begged to come, and in next hours, next minutes, and next maybe hour, we managed to untie each other. In fact, I was rolling and help each other to untie and to hide in the bushes before the next truck arrived, and they kept killing. And it was horror what we said. Suffering for me, because only other survivor knows how I suffered at that moment, because he helped me to stem my bleeding. And day after, we are looking from the hill, not far from there, we are looking machinery which collected the remains, dead bodies, and put them on the trucks, and they drove them somewhere to mass grave. And it was the most difficult moment for me, because I could never imagine such scene, because I thought it was our far history, and before I could only see that on the films in the black white color, but now it was in color, not far in front of my eyes. And I could never imagine such scene, despite that I saw many horrible things during the war, but to see such things that kill so many people, I could never imagine, and it is difficult to explain today and to talk about that, because really I cannot understand such that there are such people who are ready to kill so many people without any reasons. Yeah, and I will be short to just to say that after that we wandered everywhere, because we had to flee, to go somewhere, but we didn't know where we were. In fact, we couldn't orientate, we couldn't find orientation where to go. And after that we discovered some signs, some receipts from the destroyed houses, and we concluded where we were, in fact. And we slept everywhere, in Orthodox graveyards, in destroyed houses, in the bushes, everywhere. And after few days and few nights, we arrived in one village which was under Bosnian government control, but it was by accident that we arrived there, that we didn't stop on minefields, and that we were so lucky. But I remember that I was crawling at that moment, that I couldn't walk, but my friend, other survivor, helped me. And I just remember later, when we arrived in one village, that there's so many people, women, children, and men. They poured drops of water in my mouth, and they crying around me. I started to cry as well. I thought and I realized that I survived, in fact, and I thought that my father survived at that moment. But unfortunately not. My father killed as well on other location for mass executions. My uncle was killed as well, and his remains found in many different mass graves far from location when he was killed. Other male relatives who decided to go to find shelter in the UN base in Potocari were separated and was killed on many different locations. And later I arrived in Tuzla in the hospital, and my recovery lasted for so long. Later they found my mother in a refugee camp with 3 younger sisters, and they came to see me and to help me. And after that, it was after that horror, it was the most difficult period of my life.
Nejad, I'm seeing both privately and publicly some reaction, and I've said this to you before, but anytime I hear your story and other survivors' story, it's just so impactful. And I have to say, I think the courage you show in sharing your story is just incredible, because to relive those events must be incredibly difficult for you. But it's also really important that you do, so that we understand and that we remember those victims, including, and I am so sorry that you lost your father and uncle and other family members, but it's so important that we remember them and others who lost their lives. Thank you so much for that. Nejad, is it okay if we ask some questions and we open it up